Ohio's own marks 1 year as the nation's vice president. Welcome to Columbus on the Record. I'm Mike Thompson. 1 year ago, the only vice president from Ohio took office. It has been an eventful year for the Trump-Vance administration. We focus more on Trump, of course, than J.D. Vance, but he has been a more visible vice president than many of his predecessors. His most memorable moment came about a month into the job.
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Of course, the conflict in Ukraine continues, and Vance continues to aggressively defend the president's policies. Most recently, he has been the president's point man in Minnesota, supporting immigration enforcement and denouncing protesters. Gene Krebs, we'll get to Morgan Harper's opinion on the vice president in a moment. But first, I want to ask you, how do Republicans view J.D. Vance a year into his vice presidency, particularly loyal supporters of the president?
Loyal supporters of the president, they find J.D. Vance to be very closely aligned with the president on, and it has to do with the approach. Trump is fueled largely by grievances. Remember, Obama mocked him at a correspondence dinner, and that's what propelled him to run. J.D. Vance went to elementary school just over the ridge from the farm, a few miles away. His mother, her peer group, rode the school bus with me. I'm very familiar with the Appalachian refugees, if you will, that people who came up seeking jobs and everything. I know how they think, and they are fueled to a large extent also by grievances, because when they were first arriving, they were widely mocked and made fun of. And he feels a strong sense of grievance, and this is now their turn. Remember, go back to when they said, will he propel them to victory in the upper Midwest? Said, anywhere the Appalachian diaspora occurred, they'll get more votes. And that came out about right.
So far, so good for maintaining his support among those folks into his vice presidency.
Yes.
Morgan, how would you assess J.D. Vance in his first term? He always has to, the VP always has to be in lockstep with the president. That'd be very rare if it didn't happen.
Yeah, I think that we've seen from J.D. Vance not necessarily a ton of leadership, but exactly that, following the president, reinforcing his policies. But I don't think we have a clear sense of how those policies are being received in terms of him as a candidate on his own, or even he as a leader on his own. And that's what's going to be interesting for him moving forward. I think that he is taking a gamble here and betting that aligning with this administration, one of the most corrupt administrations in history, that is enriching itself, talking about people who have a lot less than he and any of these people that are affiliated with it do currently. How that will play for him politically when he tries to run for president on his own, not clear.
Jake, it's a balance. The vice president has to be aggressive, especially in this case, has to be aggressive in defending the president, but he can't steal the spotlight. So J.D. Vance is always sort of balancing that. We saw it with the Ukraine president meeting at the Oval Office.
I think of some vice presidents as almost spear catchers, and J.D. Vance is more of a spear. I mean, he is out there making incendiary comments when there's a controversial issue. If you're talking about anything from the Haitians in Springfield eat dog stuff, or ICE's interaction with citizens in Minnesota, you're going to have J.D. Vance not out there to put out fires, but almost to start them. And to when there's an accusation coming at Trump, J.D. Vance is the guy who's going to give some echo of that accusation back at some politically disfavored party.
Also, there's a balance, Jesse. He has to balance supporting the president, and now as the end of Donald Trump's term creeps closer. Still 3 years left, but after the midterms, it's really going to get speed up. He has to start separating himself to some degree from the president, especially if the president remains as unpopular as he is.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting. This is really his tryout for being the presidential candidate in a few more years, and whether he is going to be able to find those issues that he can kind of lean to the right, or I guess to the left of President Trump at this point. But to everyone's point, I mean, he's largely sticking to the talking points of this administration, which, I mean, you saw Mike Pence do to a certain extent in the first administration, but certainly Vance is more out front about it.
Really, to understand J.D. Vance, you want to go to his Republican National Convention speech, and there's particular lines in there where he was exhibiting hatred towards the large corporations, which is very typical of the kids I grew up with and their parents. Okay, this is very much an Appalachian trait. What also is interesting, I've not done the research on this. I've been told that when he was in the Senate, the senator he co-sponsored most legislation with was Elizabeth Warren. Because it's the horseshoe thing, he's actually very much a interventionist, populist, big government now we own part of Intel, all of that type of stuff. That's where he's coming from. To understand J.D. Vance, he's not Appalachian, he's the Appalachian dispersal that occurred.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jean brings up a good point, and that's why some people from my side of the aisle, and particularly the more economically progressive side of the Democratic Party, was in some ways cautiously optimistic in thinking if he does follow through on some of the policy priorities he had as a senator, then yes, things like capping credit card interest rates, we might see some good policy get through. He pushed for Gail Slater to be the head of the Department of Justice Antitrust Division, who also apparently believes that there should be blocking of mergers, that we don't continue to see an increase in corporate concentration. The thing that's happened, though, is Gail Slater has absolutely no power over what's happening at DOJ Antitrust. That is a pay-as-you-play, and whoever comes with the highest dollar amount that can influence that White House to get their mergers through wins the day. That's the legacy of J.D. Vance.
He's the vice president of the country, but he's from Ohio. Has Ohio benefited tangibly from him being vice president? Any, projects that wouldn't have happened because he's here or in that position?
I guess the closest thing I could say is it's brought a certain political relevance and attention to Ohio, and that it's not so, in my opinion, it's not so much a politically competitive state, and it gets more attention like one that is. But no, I can't think of, there hasn't been some, I know there's interest in getting NASA to open a base here. There hasn't been a big surge of federal funds that I'm aware of. The biggest infrastructure project that comes to mind in Ohio is the Brent Spence Bridge. Yep. That's been the white whale of 4 U.S. presidents. It still hasn't been built, but it was funded under President Biden.
Jesse, J.D. Vance has sort of carved a path. He was the first sort of outsider to win a major race statewide, then followed by Bernie Moreno. And now Vivek Ramaswamy is running for governor. He could be next.
Yeah, so really both Vivek Ramaswamy and Dr. Amy Acton are candidates for Ohio governor who have no political experience, who have never won a statewide election before. And you're seeing that kind of interest in candidates who, A, don't have a record that can be held against them, and B, are not part of this kind of establishment that a lot of people are opposed to both the Republican and Democratic Party right now.
Yeah. You see some complaints that now that J.D. Vance has been in Washington, 3 years? He is part of the establishment now. Anyway, as of the end of last year, just 3 weeks ago, some 500,000 Ohioans were getting their health insurance through the Affordable Care Act. But as of January, first temporary COVID Obamacare subsidies expired and the premiums rose. Since then, a fifth of those Ohioans on Obamacare, 120,000, have left the program. Ohio saw the second largest decline by percentage in the country. Advocates say more Ohioans could leave as the year continues as Obamacare subsidies start to hit home. In Washington, lawmakers are trying to work out a plan to restore some of the subsidies, but there's no imminent deal. Morgan Harper, to put the numbers in context, if you go back to 23 and 24, the number of Ohioans on Obamacare doubled, went from 250,000 to 500,000. So now with the subsidies gone, we're down 100,000. So in context, it's not that big a drop, right?
Yeah, but I think the larger issue here is we're only going to probably continue to see more drop off with the policymaking or lack thereof that's happening in Washington. And then we also have to think about the quality of care that people are getting and also just the overall cost. Even if you are staying on ACA and have one of the market plans, you are paying a lot of money to be able to do that. And I hear from people every day in my personal network, hearing stories on social media that folks cannot keep up with these costs. The ACA, Affordable Care Act, was an important and impactful expansion of coverage, but it has not addressed the fundamental cost problem in U.S. healthcare. To do that, we need Medicare for all. We need more people who are under the publicly sponsored and a larger risk pool.
No, the president's plan is to take the money that would have gone to the subsidies and put it in health savings accounts to sort of cut the insurance company out. Now, you could use the account to pay for insurance, I suppose, but is that going to be effective?
No. And I don't think that I think the rhetoric of the administration has been kind of like what Jean was saying, talking about going after the large insurers, big healthcare companies. We're starting to see that, but the actual policies that they are proposing will not do that. To do that, you need to separate these companies that have become vertically integrated, and we have to expand the pool of people that are in Medicare to be able to bring costs down and leverage the power and the purchasing power of government.
Obamacare in the rural areas, Medicaid expansion's popular in that area. Obamacare, what kind of effect is it having in rural Ohio?
Well, I can tell you the effect it's having politically, which will give you some idea. So Mike Carey and Max Miller both voted for the funding of the ACA. Okay, and the reason is because in both cases they have a +4 and a +5 index Republican seat. They've also had libertarians pull petitions, and historically libertarians get between 4 and 7 percentage points. Now that makes those seats now truly in play, and they know that this is a general election issue, not a primary issue, and they're thinking ahead to November. So that's how you're seeing it already play out.
So long term is the plan that President Trump wants to implement, Morgan Harper, Medicare for All. That's not going to happen anytime soon. But these premiums are hitting home right now, Jake. They will have an effect on voters and the whole affordability debate.
Yeah, well, Donald Trump has had 5 years as president now. There's always a health care plan around the corner. There's never a legislative package that has come that really lays it out. So, when one comes, there's something to talk about. But until then, it's really just rhetoric. But in the meantime, like you mentioned, 200,000 Ohioans do not have health insurance. Those people still need health care. They will go to hospitals. Those costs will roll out to all of us. So even those of us lucky to be covered will eat those costs. And politically, even the people who continue to be insured will see hundreds of dollars a month, so thousands of dollars per year are coming. And the big question in my mind, the great struggle of the Biden administration, by their telling, was we did these great things for people, and we never really got credit for it from the voters. We passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill. We passed the CHIPS Act, and people didn't love us for it. And I'm wondering if when people see their health care premiums go up or go up so high that they can't have health insurance anymore, who will they blame?
Democrats, Jesse, are blaming John Husted, who's now a senator. They're blaming Mike Carey, other Congress people around the state. So Amy Acton's not waiting. She's blaming Vivek Ramaswamy and his policies. So they're going to use this during the campaign.
I am shocked that people would bring this up during a political campaign, during the gubernatorial and Senate elections. But no, certainly affordability and the economy, but on a personal level, how does the economy affect me? My health insurance, my ability to buy groceries and so forth is always going to be an issue that's going to drive people to the polls. And so which party has an answer for that could be a really compelling message in 2026.
I'll just say, to pick up on one thing that Jake said, and President Biden and the administration did not do a great job of selling what they accomplished. But, if you look at Medicare price negotiation, that did bring down costs. President Trump has adopted that policy and expanded it as planned to more drugs for that negotiation. But I completely agree that the party and the people that are willing to be honest about what is driving the problems with U.S. healthcare, and it is large healthcare conglomerates that are listed on Wall Street, they will win the day. And it won't matter what party you're part of, whoever is going to be honest about that and really attack them.
All right, as companies like Google, Amazon, and Meta race to build computing power for artificial intelligence, relatively cheap land and generous tax incentives have made Ohio a prime choice for data centers. The warehouse-looking buildings are popping up everywhere. They need a lot of power, and that is straining the electric grid and generating facilities. The questions are, where will the power come from? Are we able and willing to build new nuclear plants? And the biggest question is, who's going to pay for all of this? Jesse Balmert, what are state officials, are they excited by data centers coming, or are they dreading them? What's their feeling?
Certainly Ohio is attracting these businesses here, so I think there's a general desire for them to be in the state. But then on the other end, we are concerned about just the immense energy load that these organizations need. As far as nuclear power, there was a deal with Meta and two of the plants that were Davis-Besse and Perry nuclear plants now owned by Vistra that was announced recently, and then also possibly building smaller operations in southern Ohio. And so that seems to be the direction that the company is going in, and these kind of deals are going in right now. But certainly there's a lot of policy questions about this.
Lawmakers want to form a study commission, Jake. They're beating Mike DeWine to the punch. No working group. It's a study commission. study this now? Is it too late? These data centers are here.
What I would say is a study commission are where good ideas go to die. And if you are in the industry, any legislation that is coming for you is probably not favoring you. So a study commission, if you are someone who owns data centers, is actually probably a great outcome. The legislature tried to eliminate tax incentives that we offer. It actually passed that, and Mike DeWine vetoed it. There has been talk of an override, but at this point it has been just that talk. I think the nuclear element that Jesse brought up is really interesting. That did come out in an announcement from Facebook, from Meta, and I believe one of the power developers. I would add a little bit of salt on that to say that we do not really build much nuclear power in the U.S. We do not have a single of these small modular reactors existing. What we do have in the U.S. is a huge political problem for the data centers. And then this problem comes out, I think they said by 2030 it'll be operational. So don't worry about all these power strains and all this poobah in the news. We're just going to bring this technology that we're really bad at building in the U.S. in the first place, and we're going to build these small modular reactors that don't exist anywhere. So we got it covered.
Gene, these data centers were first in Hilliard, New Albany, but now they're coming out to your neck of the woods, far western Ohio and the rural areas. And folks there are very dubious of these data centers.
That's an understatement. I have been wrong on this show many times, but back in September, I forecast that data centers were going to be the toxic topic for Republicans running statewide in this state, because where they're going is in ruby red Republican areas. And I have never seen, well, like you folks in Signal published, you interviewed me about a project in Preble County. I said, I have never seen my citizens so upset and unified in hatred against a development project as I have seen this.
What's the root of that anger? Is it loss of farmland? What is it?
Okay, so full disclosure, I cut my eye teeth on farmland preservation back in the late 90s, but that's not the real issue. The real issue is it goes back to grievance. They feel, with some justification, that they've been exploited for years by their big city brethren, taken for granted, picking various categories, and they're viewing this as another manifestation of it. They say, well, that's fine. Put them in Upper Arlington. Put them in Bexley. Okay? They see this as a class issue, and that's hard to argue against.
So you have allies, I would assume, Morgan, in trying to control these and regulate these data centers, and especially when it comes to who pays for the electricity, because we all got to pay for it if we don't have enough of it.
Yeah, I think it is a very interesting organizing moment on this issue, data centers, because I agree with you. I just met with someone this morning from Hilliard, Annette Singh, who's been leading some of the organizing against the data centers that are being built. Not just the data centers, we have to also talk about the diesel generators that in many cases are old school, very clearly bad for everyone's health, being built right or proposed to be built right by where children are playing in parks. Ridiculous. And the sentiment that I'm hearing is people cannot believe that elected officials would sign off on this for the benefit of these large corporations. If Meta wants to build a data center, we'll put it in the backyard of their CEOs that are making billions of dollars off of this AI technology that no one clearly understands the benefit of. The only thing I would add, and this is something important for us that are organizing these issues and thinking about them, is the jobs that are being created. That is often touted as the reason why we should accept our fate that the big tech overlords have bestowed upon us. And I don't want to diminish that. There are people that are making money off of building these, then the building trades and different union jobs, and that is important. But we should also make sure that there are other opportunities to build things that truly will provide a benefit to us as a country, as a city, as a state.
So, Justin, do we see a moratorium on these? Do we see local, like for instance, local governments can now veto a solar farm? Do we ever see the legislature saying the county commission can veto a data center?
You know, we have not seen that piece of legislation introduced yet, but it really does. If this becomes an issue for voters or for organizers, it could be something that moves the needle there.
Well, what's the other complication? So there's no controlling legal authority on these sightings right now. But there is a thing at the local level called zoning. And my home county is also single county zoned with a very strict zoning rules and regulations. We only allow maybe a dozen houses to be built in unincorporated territory each year. So I'm long term, but 40% of Ohio, most of Appalachia has no zoning. So for these big firms, that's going to be a happy hunting ground for them. So my suggestion for if you really are concerned about this, you need to go to your elected officials, township or county level, and get zoned. Develop zoning for your township, or that's your first line of intelligent planning for this.
We're going to get to the other side of nuclear energy. Remember that scandal stemming from a plan to bail out nuke plants in northern Ohio? Well, it's about to reappear in the news. The bribe recipients have been punished. Now it's the accused bribers' turn to face justice. First Energy executives go on trial this week in Northeast Ohio. Former CEO Chuck Jones and former chief lobbyist Mike Dowling face charges they paid $4.5 million in bribes to former Chief Utility Regulator Sam Randazzo. They argue it was not a bribe, but a consultant fee. Governor DeWine and now Senator, then Lieutenant Governor John Husted are on the potential witness list for this trial. Jack Zuckerman, it's been 5.5 years, and the persons who are accused of making the bribes are now just going on trial. What is taking so long?
Well, what's beyond the 5.5 years since the accusation, the actual changing of hands of the money, which is not in dispute. All parties agree that the money changed hands, was 7 years ago, just about to the day. That's a remarkable thing. Well, I'll tell you, I mean, this sounds like the most obvious comment on planet Earth, but I am excited to hear these two men finally answer for this. This was an implied accusation as far back as 2020. It was a direct accusation in 2024. It implicates the entire state of Ohio and whether or not any of us can expect honest services from our government. And finally, these two men are going to have to answer for themselves and I hope testify in their own defense. I would like to hear in their own words, was this or was this not a bribe?
And these are the state charges, Jesse. We're still the federal charges, like Larry Householder was convicted in federal court. These folks still face charges in federal court as well.
Yeah, so this all is bringing us back. In 2020 is when the FBI arrested Larry Householder, former Speaker of the Ohio House of Representatives, and 4 other individuals in connection with legislation that was passed to help bail out 2 nuclear plants and defend that against a ballot initiative to block it. And those individuals went through kind of the court system. 2 of them were convicted, including Householder, a 20-year prison sentence. In the meantime, no one was accused of actually providing these bribes. And so Attorney General Dave Yost got involved, filed some state charges. Later, there were federal charges that were filed. And so that federal case is kind of waiting until after the state case is resolved.
Gene, you had alluded there might be other folks who might be implicated in this, and that really hasn't happened since the original indictments.
Because at this point in time, they haven't had the trials going on. And I always do this PSA on your show. If you know anything about about House Bill 6 and the corruption involved, get a hold of Dave Yost and the feds quickly, because otherwise they won't love you.
But isn't the statute of limitations gone now if it was 7 years since money changed hands?
I don't know that aspect of it, but I'm expecting people to start making deals as they go up as they get called. And by the way, Larry Householder, he's undergoing trial in June, and I expect him to do the Samson in the Temple thing, pull the pillars down, and throw everybody he can under the bus.
That's for the state charges he faces.
That's for and by the way, under the Tom Noe CoinGate scandal, it was the state charges that were the much longer. They were like 6 times longer than the Fed sentences.
So why hasn't this huge scandal, $60 billion, it's not really, we talk about it all the time, but the general public, whatever.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and because this scandal also touches on just the general corruption of the utility industry that has certainly taken place and been pretty thorough, both of the state officials that are supposed to regulate them and the utilities themselves, and it's a national trend. And yeah, why aren't people in the streets about this? I mean, I think that there is this sense, and this is where we're talking about why are people turning on the establishment. I think there is a growing understanding now of how people we thought were looking out for us, whether elected, whether the experts, maybe weren't getting it right. And in fact, in some cases, were actively working to enrich themselves against our futures. But the organizing continues because I agree. I think there probably should be more outrage about this.
All right, let's get to our final off-the-record parting shots. And Gene, we'll start with you.
4 months ago, Cleveland.com graciously published an op-ed I submitted to them about a compromise on the property tax repeal issue. And much to my surprise, we've been having some bipartisan meetings with some folks, and we've not been thrown out of anybody's office yet. So I'm quite surprised at that. So
Keep hope alive, right,
I'm
Gene?
optimistic.
All right. Morgan.
People do want to start hitting the streets on utility issues. We'll be outside the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio headquarters in downtown Columbus on Tuesday to protest AEP Ohio's most recent rate case, and folks are welcome to join.
Jake.
Well, this might be important information for approximately dozens of your viewers, but by popular demand, cycling season is back. The Tour Down Under has started in Australia. Thank you to anyone who's out there watching it.
This weekend is going to be perfect for cycling.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect for cycling. Indoors, of course. Jesse.
Congratulations to the long-suffering fans of the Indiana Hoosiers who won the college football playoffs this past week.
Isn't that incredible? The Indiana Hoosiers are national champions in football.
It almost makes you think the Democrats could win statewide in Ohio.
There we go, Gene.
One miracle at a time, right, Gene?
Very A to B.
Well, we talked about J.D. Vance's memorable moments. He had another one where he dropped the Buckeyes trophy at the White House ceremony. And we Patriots fans are very glad that it did not land on Travion Henderson's foot, because he's had quite the season for the Pats as they try to make it to another Super Bowl this weekend. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Don't forget to watch us anytime on your time. Watch us repeatedly during a snowstorm. Watch us on our website, wosu.org/COTR. We're on the PBS app and our brand new WOSU News YouTube channel. Go to YouTube, search WOSU News, and there we are. Click subscribe to see every episode. For our crew and our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.